Good morning, Mary Elizabeth, and welcome as our presenter for this morning. Mary Elizabeth began her wisdom journey as a graduate of Our Lady of Wisdom Academy. She entered the novitiate of the Daughters of Wisdom after graduation. She would, like so many of us, begin her studies at St. John's University, where she obtained a BS in medical technology. While with the Daughters of Wisdom, Mary Elizabeth worked as a lab technician at Good Samaritan Hospital in West Islip, New York, and later at Maryview Hospital, Portsmouth, Virginia. It was at this point in her journey that she answered a call within a call, in which her calling to religious life ended, but her journey with wisdom led her to embrace a second calling. Mary Elizabeth obtained her PhD in psychology from the Catholic University of America, and from that achievement flowed a number of amazing accomplishments. She worked as a forensic psychologist in the juvenile and adult courts in Washington, D.C., and later in the police and fire clinic in Washington, D.C., counseling first responders. Mary Elizabeth contributed articles for publication in Human Development, a periodical dedicated to the interface between psychology and religious life. This led to her working relationship between Father James Gill, S.J., and Linda Amadeo, which continued as they opened a program in human sexuality geared toward providing training for priests, religious, and others in parish and formation ministry. And during this period, Mary Elizabeth conducted workshops for various religious communities that incorporated religious themes with psychology. But best of all, Mary Elizabeth has written a book titled Seasoned with Sage, Savoring Life's Wisdom. In this book, she uses a developmental approach, incorporating insights from the work of Eric and Joan Erickson, as well as other psychologists who address the acquisition of wisdom in later life. So, welcome again, Mary Elizabeth.
Thank you, Anne. That was lovely of you. And when Anne Casagrande and Pat invited me to do today's presentation, they sent me some background reading, which I did dutifully, and then asked me to reflect on how I came to know and relish our common home, incorporating both wisdom literature and Laudate Deum. And as I thought about the topic, I came to the realization that my appreciation for our common home started, as all good creation stories do, in a garden. It was my grandmother's garden, to be honest. And we used to visit my grandmother just about every Saturday afternoon. My father would let us play in the backyard, and he would have mother doing some outdoor chores. And as my sister and I got a little bit older, World War II was making the idea of planting a victory garden an important piece of the war effort. So we asked my dad, could we have a victory garden, Daddy? And okay, my father said we could each have one item. So my sister chose tomatoes, but I wanted sweet peas. And I was roundly criticized by my sister for my choice because they were just flowers and they would not be eaten. However, I was lucky. My father said to us that having beautiful things to look at was also helping the war effort. And so I grew sweet peas. And then many years later, I read Robert Frost. And that's when I knew I was a slave to a springtime passion for the earth, ever after. But then during novitiate years, I was introduced to the wisdom literature, which really resonated with me, as did Montfort's chapter 3 in Love of Eternal Wisdom, where he has wisdom playing in creation, a creation that is beautiful, orderly, and diversified. And so some of my favorite scripture verses came from the book of Proverbs, where we meet wisdom created at the beginning of the Lord's work, set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth, established before the heavens, beside the Lord like a master worker, and delighting him and rejoicing in his world. But even more so, as time went on, I grew to Sirach 24, where wisdom sings her own praises, telling of her glory and her rootedness in an honored people. And so the image of wisdom as tree of life became one of my very favorites. And also in the book of Sirach, what I really loved was she compares herself to a cedar of Lebanon, a cypress, a palm, or an olive tree, a rose bush, and a vine that puts forth delights and whose glorious blossoms yield abundant fruit. I presume she meant a grape. And then more recently, I discovered Rami Shapiro's revisioning of Love of Eternal Wisdom, where he extols wisdom as the mother of all things, not merely the maker, but a loving and sustaining mother who dwells within creation, a source of life, a way of life, the order and the harmony of the universe, whose play is found in the diversity of life, the timing of seasons, the subtleties of color, taste, size, shape. So much so, he tells us, that once we know wisdom, the bee, the ant, an ear of corn, a flower, and a worm are each seen wrapped in ecstasy. I will confess, I haven't gotten to ecstasy over the ants and the worms, but I appreciate the work they do. I was also fortunate enough to join the Sophia group that met at Wisdom House for many years. And I was exposed to a number of wonderful authors. You had Brian Swim, Thomas Berry, Wendell Berry, Joanna Macy, and many more. Because any of you who knew Barbara Moore, you understood she was a slave driver. And all of these, though, nourished a sense of our place in the new cosmology. They encouraged us to appreciate the archetypal mysteries of earth, wind, fire, and water. And they enhanced our love for our common home by fostering a sense of our place in the web of life. That's the sacred belonging that Terry Moran spoke of back in March. And then more recently, thank you, Ellen Francois, Richard Rohr's daily meditations highlighted what he termed the soul of nature, reminding us that each living being reveals some aspect of wisdom, and echoing Thomas Berry, he urged us to be spiritually nourished by the world because it provides a revelatory experience that allows us to access our full intelligence and wisdom and alleviates the sense of isolation and unhappiness that accompanies our loss of contact with nature. And so, from that background, I read Laudate Deum, kindly provided by Anne and Pat, and it was really the last parts of it that hit me hard because I felt the same anguish and frustration that Francis spoke of. I mean, he says once and for all, let us put an end to irresponsible derision that would present the issue of climate change as something purely ecological or green or romantic. And finally admit that it's a human and social problem on any number of levels. And for this reason, it calls for our involvement. And Pope Francis invites us to journey in communion and commitment, reminding us that our Judeo-Christian version of the cosmos tells us that human life is unsustainable without the other creatures that are part of our universe. We're all linked by those unseen bonds in the web of life. And together we form a universal family. And so, while urging us to help make our common home more beautiful, because this has to do with our personal dignity and our highest values, Francis is also realistic enough to know that the most effective solutions cannot come from just our individual efforts alone. we will need to influence major political decisions on national and international levels. However, he also noted, as personal, family, and community habits change, we contribute to a growing concern about the unfulfilled responsibilities of the political sectors at home and abroad, and help bring about large processes of transformation rising up from deep within our society, which is the best way to get them to the forefront. And so while thinking along these lines, I noted Richard Rohr again quoted several women authors who addressed similar issues. For example, Robin Wall Kimmerer, now you probably know her from her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. She observed that we who have been gifted with the earth bear an equal responsibility for stewarding our resources. And another author, Deborah Reinstra, who's a professor at Calvin University in Michigan, spoke of our need to develop a pattern of reciprocity. We take from the earth and we have to give back to it. Still another resource whose name I have lost, mea culpa. I thought I saved it and I didn't. But nonetheless, that lady also spoke of our love for the earth and prompting us to engage in dedicated service on behalf of our common home. However, the thought I most resonated with came from an article by a Sister Corbin Hanna, a Sister of Providence from St. Mary's of the Woods in Indiana. You are interested, you can find it in the Global Sisters Report, because it seemed to be such a wonderful companion piece to Terry's concept of sacred belonging. She called it sacred activism. And Sister Corbin defined this as contemplation and embodied compassion in action. So social change rooted in a deep knowledge of the interconnectedness of all life. Sacred activism is about transforming the way we see ourselves and all creation, responding from a grounding in love, and cultivating the inner freedom that leads to bold and compassionate action. And so I would invite you to take some time for silent reflection to be followed by sharing. And the question I would pose for today is, in light of your experiences of sacred belonging, in conjunction with your study and appreciation of wisdom literature, and thinking of Francis' exhortation in Laudate Deum for action at personal and political levels, how can you embody your insights in action, whether you wish to engage from the perspective of responsibility, reciprocity, dedicated service, sacred activism, in your own home, local community, or on the national or international level, depending on where you are in life. So with that, I leave you to think. Pray.